everyone, and welcome to the Wonderful Leaders webinar on growing in your leadership. Leadership is a huge topic, and we're going to try and do it justice in the next 30-40 minutes. I've got a guest joining me later on to do a little bit of a Q&A, and we're going to go through some common questions that we get asked as we do these kind of webinars and deal with leaders. But just to give you a little starting point, this is what you signed up to. Growing in your leadership webinar, how to lead in an ever-changing environment. We're going to look at some of that. We're going to look at how do I know what areas I need to develop in order to become a better leader. And we're going to look at the role of spiritual discipline in leadership. For some of you, that might be something you currently practice that feels kind of bread and butter. For others of you, this might be a new concept. So hopefully, as we unpack that, you'll kind of get some great insight from there as well. So for those that don't know me and I don't know, and obviously I can't see all of you on here today, I am Dan Maudhub, founder and CEO of the Wonderful Group. We are a common group of companies with a mission to deliver lasting change in lives, businesses, and communities. So we're hugely passionate about seeing people grow, change, develop, whether they be individual leaders, whether they be businesses and brands, whether they be communities. So a lot of what we do is around that change and that growth process, which ultimately leadership is a huge part of that. So I've got nearly 20 years experience in business and leadership. Gosh, it makes me sound old. And I've had the privilege of working with leaders across the globe and helping them in their personal and professional leadership. Outside the Wonderful Group, I sit on a bunch of not-for-profits, a bunch of charities, and also help to coach rugby. So that's also a huge passion of mine as well. So just a little bit about me, and now we want to talk about you. So I think just to kind of kick off, I think it's fair to say, for those of you that are listening and watching today, the last 3-4 years has been challenging and changing in every way, from our external environment to governments to politics to economics. I mean, it felt like 2019 felt like it was a holiday. Can you even remember pre-pandemic? Life just felt different in every single way. So I think it's fair to say that there's been so many shifting sands and shifting of our lifestyles, of everything around us. And that kind of can cause a lot of uncertainty. So one of the things we want to talk about today is how to lead through that uncertainty and how to kind of navigate that as a leader and as a person. But before we get there, I want to look at something around what is leadership. You know, leadership is not just a buzzword or a phrase, or it's not one-dimensional. And so this diagram you can hopefully see in front of you, I just want to just unpack some of the different layers and nuances of leadership, because it's a hugely, hugely important topic. And before we even go ahead, I wanted to say one thing. Everyone watching this webinar is a leader. So you might be sitting there thinking, but I'm sitting in my bedroom right now. I've got nothing to give. I don't know what's going on. I'm not sure about life. I'm not sure about what's going on. I really hope by the end of this session, you will at least know that you can lead and you're called to lead. And actually, you've got the tools that you need to lead. So I want to look at these layers of leadership, as we say. And the inner layer, I really believe the inner layer of leadership, what it's really all about is about your deep conviction, that sense of insight, that sense of, I want to see change. I want to see something happen. And that could be in your personal life. It could be in an area of your life. It could be in your business or organization. It could be in community. But I believe real leadership starts with insight, starts with that sense of there's a change that needs to happen. An obvious example of that in our personal lives might be, you look at get to my age, look at yourself in the mirror and you think, okay, there's some change that might need to happen here in the body. You know, I might need to get to the gym a bit more. I might need to exercise a bit more. Now that takes leadership, right? That takes me to say, I want to see a change. So I really believe that all good leadership starts with insight, starts with that deep conviction. Now, the second layer of leadership I want to just unpack before we get into some of the webinar is the area of character. Now, I mean, let's be honest, if you look at the news or you're scrolling through socials and you're looking at what's going on in politics and the economy, in the dramas we've had through the COVID period with the government and all of that stuff. And I'm not here to be a naysayer, but actually a lot of the challenges we see in leadership is around character, right? You see so many challenges around people kind of not doing what they say they're going to do, not living up to the moral or ethical conduct around the leadership. And so character becomes a real key layer within the whole leadership mindset and a leadership program that we go on in our lives. The third area, the third layer is skill. So actually, leadership is something that is learned as you go along. So there's an element of skill, of development, and growing as a leader. So, you know, and the thing I want to say there is that you're doing all three as you go along, and doing all five as you go along. So it's not just you do one, then you do the other, then you do the other. But these are layers like an onion skin. And the fourth layer is a sense of gifting. So actually identifying your strengths. Each of us have very different strengths and weaknesses. If we were to do a test together right now, we would all identify as having different strengths and all identify as different weak spots. So leadership is also about understanding, utilizing, and being empowered in your gifting. And then the outer layer of leadership is that sense of performance, is that sense of results. So ultimately, leadership, one of the outcomes of leadership is a sense of generating results or moving things on, moving things forward. So going back to the gym example, ultimately I've got to get that insight and that conviction to say I need to do something about what I see. I need to have the character to go, do you know what? I'm going to swallow my pride or whatever it is. I'm going to get to the gym. You've got the skill, you've got the gifts, but ultimately you want to see results. So there's a journey to leadership. There's the layers to leadership. So when we talk about this word, we're not just talking about something one-dimensional, something that only a certain few people can do, or the big guys on the stages, they're the leaders, and I'm just silly old me. I really want to dispel that myth from the get-go because it's not true, and that's not what leadership is about. And each and every one of us, if you look at those five layers, each and every one of us can operate in all five or in some of those layers every single day. Every single day, there's an opportunity to get up and say, what's my conviction today? What is it I want to see changing today? What areas of my life do I want to see changing? What areas of relationships do I want to see changing in my organization or my business? What areas do I really want to see that development in? And that's the insight bit, that's the conviction bit, and then so on and so forth. So hopefully you're following me so far. But I mean, I remember, just leading through uncertainties where we're going to start as the first point in the webinar today. And I remember December 2019, live in Kent, and just opened up this beautiful co-working space, 4,500 square foot of newly refurbed office space and co-working space in Maidstone in Kent. Big PR launch, Christmas party. Pictures were everywhere on socials. Everything was looking really good. January 2020, start to hear about this thing called COVID. March 2020, shut. Within 3 months of launching this new business called the Wonder Hub, we were shut, done, finished. No sales, no clients, nothing. And at the same time, my team was all office based. So one of my main businesses I run is an agency called the Wonderful Creative Agency. We were largely an office based team based in Kent. We'd come in every day. We would brainstorm together. We'd work on clients together with lovely boardroom space. Shut, gone. Half my team moved away. Some went to Portugal. Some moved to the other end of England. And all of a sudden, I've gone from this co-working space called the Wonder Hub with my agency being based there to literally being based in my front room. And I was like, that was a lot of uncertainty. And you've gone from being in the room with people to literally sitting I was going to say in my pants, but I wasn't, but sitting in the front room, just like, what do I do? Where do we go? And I'm sure in different ways, we all have faced and do face uncertainty in our own leadership. So I want you to look at your own life for the next few minutes. Now, obviously, some of you might be leading businesses or organizations, and uncertainty can be quite wide, financial uncertainty, clients, staff, HR. There's so much in business that we can talk about. But I want you just to think about your own life for a moment and look around, look at areas that might be uncertain in your life. And I want to talk to you about two things that might help with this process of leading through uncertainty. The first one is anchors. I want to talk about anchors, number one, and secondly, rudders. So just a quick caveat to this, I'm not some kind of boating person. I'm not going to give you loads of amazing metaphors about sailing and boating. If I get in a boat, I basically would probably crash it. So like, I'm not going to give you some great deep insight into sailing here. But as I've been really thinking about, what does leading through uncertainty look like? These two pictures come into my mind. One is of anchors and one is of rudders. So what does an anchor do when it comes to a boat? Well, an anchor very simply stops the boat from moving and keeps it in a safe space. It keeps it in a space where it's not going to move, where it can stay still and it can be safe. So you generally anchor in a harbour or somewhere safe, and that's about as far as I go my understanding of boating. But what I do know is that you generally, an anchor is what keeps you grounded. So one of the things I want to look at, and what we're going to ask some questions in a minute, is what are the anchors in your own leadership? What are the anchors in your life and your leadership that keep you grounded? So let's give some examples of what could an anchor look like. So for example, an anchor can look like your beliefs, your fundamental beliefs. So when everything shifts around you, when my co-working space shut down, the agency went remote, clients were leaving left, right, and center, things were looking very, very uncertain in my life. I had to go back to saying, what are my core anchors? What do I believe? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my business? What do I believe about what I'm called to? What do I believe about my leadership? What do I believe about my gifting? You have to go back to your core beliefs. So the first kind of key point, I suppose, around the anchor piece is that when life is uncertain, what are the anchors that keep you grounded? So as we said, it could be your beliefs. Other things it could be your values. So values are a hugely important part of our leadership. So what do we mean by values? Values are the things that you stand for, and also the things you don't stand for. So when things around you are uncertain, when you look at the economic climate or the political climate, or you look around you and think it all looks a bit ropey out there, which to be honest, it does a lot of the time. What do I believe? What do I stand for? And those values are the things that keep you grounded. Other anchors, and the final anchor I'll give you in this example, will be relationships. What are those relationships that keep you grounded? Those relationships that absolutely, no matter how strong the wind is metaphorically in your life, that's blowing your ship left and right, up and down, what's keeping you grounded? Because that is an absolute key anchor point. And actually, the longer I go in life and the older I get, it's like an old person now. The longer I go in my leadership in life, the more I realize that relationships are actually one of the key anchors in my life. So, question I want you to write down if you're taking notes or anything is, what anchors do I have in my life that keep me grounded through uncertain times? Now, hopefully, you've got one or two. Hopefully you can look at that, listen to what I've said and go, do you know what? Yeah, no, there's a couple of anchors I've got. And if you don't, if you're sitting there thinking, do you know what, Dan, I don't actually have any anchors that keep me grounded, that's something to work on. So it's something to look at in your leadership to say, well, actually, what anchors can I put down that's going to keep me grounded? What relationships do I need to develop? What belief systems do I need to develop? What value systems do I need to develop? That means when things are going wrong around me, I've got some anchors going on. The second one I want to look at are rudders. Now, rudder in the ship, it steers the direction of the ship. So no matter how strong the winds are, no matter what's going on in and around the ship, the winds, the waves, it can be choppy or it can be completely serene. The rudder is what's steering the ship. So the next question I've got for you to look at in your own leadership and leading through uncertainty is the areas of rudders. What is steering your life? What internal and external factors are steering the direction of your life? So that's the choices you're making. That's the belief systems you have. That's your strengths that you are or aren't employing in your leadership. That could be the team around you. So a worthwhile exercise is really to ask yourself that question and say, what rudders are steering my life right now? And then the next question to ask is to say, are they all pointing in the right direction? So, life can be quite hard when you've got different choices, mindsets, thoughts, fears, insecurities, all pulling you in different directions. And actually then look at your life as metaphorically as a ship and think, I can't see where I'm going here. I'm going in so many different directions. I'm not moving anywhere. I don't feel anchored. I don't feel grounded, but also don't feel like I'm moving anywhere. I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but I've been there in my own life and in my own leadership. But I've had to look at those anchors that are grounding me and those rudders that are steering me. So I want to really just encourage you with that. Hopefully that metaphor will make sense with you, and those questions will be something that you can sort of practically engage with and answer. And as I said, if you've got any questions as we're going along, put them in the Q&A in the chat and we'll answer them as we go along. So for the next section, next few minutes, I'd like to chat with a friend of mine and introduce Rachel Ivers, who's a leadership consultant with Giant London. And this whole area of where do I need to develop and how do I need to develop as a leader is such a big conversation. And A, I couldn't do it justice myself. And B, I wanted to bring someone in who's a real expert in this area and someone who's got a lot of insight into it. And we've only got 10, 15 minutes to chat. We're not going to unpack the whole world of development and leadership in 10, 15 minutes. What we can do is hopefully give you some pointers, some tips. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to chat with Rachel and ask Rachel some questions that I get asked a lot when it comes to the area of leadership. So welcome, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Very well. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, bit sore after losing to my kids at Taco Cat Goat Cheese Pizza. Have you ever played?
No, what is that?
Oh, you've got to play. It's a very fast moving card game.
Card game. I was
Yeah,
thinking it ended with pizza. I was thinking, what's going
no,
on there? Fast moving card game and you're sore. That sounds like quite dangerous.
I know, yeah. Um, I coach during term time and then I have to be master of board games during the holiday time. Best of both worlds.
Brilliant, 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 brilliant. Rachel, would you just give our listeners a quick 1 minute overview on yourself and what you get up to apart from playing crazy card games?
So I coach teams and individual leaders. When it's leaders, it's often leaders who are at key transitional moments of their life. So they've either sold a business or they're thinking of moving jobs or they've recently been made redundant. And we work with, small teams and leaders to take them to the next level when it comes to collaboration, decision making, communication, relationships. Because once you get the communication and relationships right, then the rest of the flywheel in terms of the capacity and execution tends to flow from there.
Brilliant. So you're in the right room today then. Perfect. So we haven't got much time, Rachel, and obviously I've got a couple of questions for you. We've got three specific questions. So let's just fire straight into them. And these are questions just for those that are watching and listening right now. These are common questions I get asked all the time. So I thought rather than give my rubbish answer, let's get Rachel, let's get the expert in and get some great answers going. So question one, Rachel, is how do I identify my strengths as a leader? How do I know what I'm good at?
That's a good question, Dan. I imagine you're probably good at most things, hey? There's
I don't
probably
think so.
most things
Absolutely
you could
not.
put your hand to it and give it a good try, and you'd probably excel at most things. I guess the question really is like, what is it that is tied to your purpose? What is it that is life-giving and energizing to you? Um, and what is it that you really feel called to? What is it that sometimes gets you angry or passionate? What are those causes that cause you to wake up in the morning with a passion? So it's often not a question of what can you do, but it's a question about like what are the I like what Pete Scazzero talks about. He talks about sealed orders. What are those sealed orders that you've been given, Dan, uniquely, which is a piece of the overall jigsaw puzzle.
That's really interesting. So you're actually likening sort of people's leadership strengths or it to actually their passions as well. So they're actually quite linked. So going back to that layers of leadership diagram we looked at the beginning, is that deep conviction, that insight, that passion that kind of comes from within
Mm,
often plays out that your strengths are kind of linked to that because Because what? Because you're passionate about it, because you're called to it, as you said. Is it? It feels like you're saying there's a real link between your strengths and your passions.
I really think there is. And whilst it seems to be somewhat of a luxury to be able to choose to do for a paid role what it is that you love and you feel is life-giving for you, I also think is a calling from God to do that which we are called to do. Sometimes we may never find out what that is, but we can give it a good shot. But I think to be consistently choosing roles that are not in line with who we really are and coming home at the end of the day completely exhausted. For
That
me, getting into a data analytical role day in, day out, staying to the letter of the law, being in the same environment, working with the same client day in, day out, that would, for me, be akin to, not fulfilling my calling.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and yeah, I can vouch for that for you. You shouldn't be doing that job, but I think that's really interesting, isn't it? It's because actually so much of our, I suppose, personal frustrations are because we're not doing the things that we're actually meant to be doing deep down, which again comes back to that conviction piece, doesn't it? That fundamental belief and difference we want to make in each, and I really do believe that each and every one of us has that within us. Whether that comes out of a place of past hurts or traumas or fears, whether it comes out of a place of passion. But each of us have got a change we want to make. And I think the best leaders are the leaders that are purpose driven, that are purpose led, that they're not just doing things for the sake of it or for the position or title or doing things because you get paid well. If I did that, I certainly wouldn't be doing what I've done for the last 20 years of my life. But it's actually born out of a deep conviction and passion. And then you develop the strengths around it. Okay, we need to move on, although I'd want to unpack that a bit more. Second question, right? And this is kind of like the other end of the spectrum, really. Often get asked, like, I've been given like a management position at work, or I'm really doing well at work, and I've got some ideas, I've got some things I want to bring, I've got some thoughts I want to bring, but I don't really know how to get my ideas across, or I can't really get my point across. And I find that a lot actually. People have got something they want to say, but they can't communicate it. And ultimately, it inhibits their leadership, right? Because they just shrink back and sit back. I don't know if anyone watching can resonate with that, but it's sort of like you end up just almost passive, but you don't want to be. So, is there anything you could? So what advice would you give to someone that's feeling in that place?
I think it's worth exploring why that is, because there's many reasons why people would not want to speak up. Like, do you have a sense for those people who have shared, or maybe it's something for you, Dan? Like, why the reticence to share ideas? Is it once bitten, twice shy? In the past, I've tried to share ideas and people didn't really hear me.
Right.
Or in the past, I've shared ideas and I've felt shot down because immediately there was a lot of critique for my ideas. And rather than
A really good point.
rather than engage with that critique, I've taken it personally and felt that it was towards me. Or is there another reason why someone might feel reticent to speak up?
That is a really good point. So actually, so for those that are listening and watching today, if you're feeling that, one of the things to look at is ask the question why, right? It's to say, well, why do I not want to speak up? I know for a lot of people that might not feel confident or comfortable with speaking in a public environment or in a small group of people. So, I know even in my own life, I sort of sometimes, quite often actually, talk to myself. I talk myself through things before I talk to others because I'm an external processor, which
Mm.
is sometimes helpful, sometimes not helpful. But actually, if I want to get a point across, I run it through myself first. Sometimes in my mind, and sometimes I am that crazy guy that talks to himself. Yes, and I just speak it out and go, no, that does actually make sense. Or I bounce it off someone. So I think there's
Mm.
both those kind of introspective things, and there's also those practical things maybe we can do to kind of go, no, I really do think this is a good point. I am going to try and get it across. And actually, there might be other ways of getting it across. It might be better to send a message first or to write it down. So often I write things down in notes or emails. Don't send them. Don't ever send a cold email. If you've got a big thing to say, don't blurt it all out and press send. But put it in your drafts, come back and revisit it. I do this in business all the time. Draft something, come back, revisit it, and then go, actually, it's probably best not to send this by email. I'm going to give them a phone call. And so it's actually a process. The communication is really a process. And it starts with that introspection, as Rachel's saying, and asking that question of why. Why don't I want to share it? Is it based on past hurts or fears or insecurities? And deal with those things first, and that really helps to move it on.
I think also if you're a leader of a team, I think it's not only the team members themselves that need to help overcome their fear of speaking up, particularly if it's based on past hurt or previous experience. But I think also it is dependent on the team leader to know themselves enough to be mature in their leadership voice and not dominate conversations if that's their natural tendency.
Yeah.
So maturity for you, Dan, I guess would be like listening to others and asking their opinions before you put on the table what you've been thinking about for weeks and incorporate into what you've been talking about and thinking about what other people are bringing forward in order to get buy-in. So I think it's the discipline of the team members and the team leader.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know that's often an environment where, and in fact, just speaking to what you just said there personally, from my perspective, I know that previously in my leadership, I've been very directional, very one-way communication because of my natural leadership strengths. And actually, I've had to learn and learning. I'm not pretending I've got this right altogether, but learning to actually ask other people's opinions first, and not for the sake of it, not just kind of just saying, what do you think, but actually listening, taking it on board, making the adjustment and seeing if it needs to adjust my opinion on something or not. So if you are, the other side of this leadership coin we're talking about, and you're leading people and you're leading teams, then I think that's a really key point. So we always talk about leading in teams, but actually, one of the things I've had to learn is, do I have a team with a leader? So in other words, I've got a team, an agency team around me, a leadership team around me, but I might be the leader of it. Or am I a leader with a team? Am I actually someone I'm on my journey, I'm on my trip, and you're the team to help make that happen? And that's a subtle nuance, but actually, if you're in leadership, it's quite a good question to ask yourself. And we don't have time to unpack that now, and maybe that could be another session. So final question, Rachel, final question I've got here written down. It said, question 3, I struggle to make decisions. What things can I do to become better at decision making? Now, from my own perspective, I'm very good and clear at making some decisions, but other decisions, I can just sit there and go, I think that's right, or I'm not sure. How many times in your mind a week do you say, I'm not sure, or maybe not, or maybe I should? So is there any advice you could kind of give in that decision-making process?
I mean, truthfully, Dan, for every model I can throw at you when it comes to making better decisions, you could probably throw 10 back at me. So let's be real, like there's no one answer. But I do think there are a few fundamental foundational truths on which we can build our decision-making capacity.
Right.
One of those, I think, is to embrace the natural God-given limits that we've got. If we've got a family, then the amount of time we've got to devote to what we do outside of our family is going to be limited. If we're married, we need to spend time with our spouse. Kids, if we're single, we need to spend time with those in our close inner circle. So I think embracing those limitations, we need to work within those. And then the other thing is, are people waking up in that kind of task-focused mode? Like tap, tap, double swipe, click. Is that how we wake up? Or are we finding our eremos and spending time seeking God's face first? And off that foundation, are we then increasing our decision-making capacity? So maybe let's just test out some decision-making on you, Dan.
Oh, gosh.
You're the only face I can see beside my own on this.
That's worrying.
So can you think of a time when you made a really good decision and you kind of went through the right steps. Keep that in mind for me for a minute. Right. First off, were you able to ideate and dream big and think of possibilities on how to make the world a better place with other competent people? Kind of first off, were you able to find people with whom you could process out loud some of those big game-changing ideas?
Yes, to a certain extent.
Okay. I know you talked about talking to yourself in the mirror. That's always
Yeah.
fun. But finding those people, like, could you rattle off 1, 2, or 3 people whom you trust, whose competence you trust? They know you're talking provisionally, because that's
Yeah.
half of it, is some people think that we're talking plan when we discuss something. And sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. It's just a provisional idea. But we need to have a safe space to talk about those ideas, whether they go ahead or not. We need to discuss them.
That's a really good point. And do you know what? There's been years in my leadership where I didn't have those people in my life. And so you kind of get frustrated and you get stuck in your own head a lot. And I don't know if anyone watching can resonate with that. You get stuck in your own mind, then you doubt yourself. Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea? Is it a good idea? I don't know. I'm stuck in that. And so I am going back to a point we talked about earlier about the rudders. I have kind of key relationships now that can help to steer the ship. So I do have those people now where I can bounce things off. And they'll give me sound advice from a kind of godly perspective, but also from a business perspective, and often, and to the point where I think recently, even in the last couple of years, I know I kind of have learned in those relationships that I don't have to take everything they say, but I definitely know that they're speaking some wisdom. And now I find it much easier to be tempered and to be reined in, because often my ideas are at stage 5 or 6, and actually I need to get to stage 1 or 2 first. And in my mind, I'm already at stage 5 and 6, and the reality is the anchor is well and truly down. I'm in the harbour, and I think I'm out there in the middle of the ocean. So the answer to your question is I have spent a long time without those people, and I think probably some people here could resonate with that. And a big rudder in my life helping me to steer my ship is finding those people.
That's good. That's good. Because the time to build your storm shelter is in advance of the storm. You can't suddenly start building your storm shelter, which is your safe few people. Well, for you, Dan, right as the storm's coming in, because that's too late, right?
Yeah.
So that testing of strategic ideas with others is hugely important. Not to miss out that kind of step. But then also important is to then take all of that, not only what the ideas that you've presented or the strategy that you presented and the critique that they've given you and the ideas that they've added on, and what you think, having talked it out loud, taking all of that then into your own self, your own space, like for you, your thinker, your introverted thinker, and really like logically, rationally critiquing that, almost coming out with a bullet point list of things that make sense about the idea. So it's almost asking the question, like, what do I really think about this idea or this strategy? Like, we're not going to put around the decision-making cycle, should I go out and buy the milk? You just go out and buy the milk if you've run out of tea. But if it's something like, should I hire this person, or should I implement this new strategy? Or someone said to me, hey, can you like run co-working spaces across the whole of London? Like, that's something that we don't want to rush that decision. Sometimes, I don't know about you, Dan, but I can get caught up in the moment. Like, I'm at an event and I'm buzzing and someone comes up with an idea or asks me to do something. And my first reflex reaction is, well, of course, that sounds really fun. Like, I'll find a way, I'll make time, I'll make space.
Right.
But of late, that sounds incredible. I'm going to take that away, and I'm going to think about it. When can I come back to you? Because to actually take it into that internal thinker for you is hugely productive time. Because sometimes it won't get past that.
Yes, correct.
You do your bullet point list of rationality, and sometimes it doesn't pass that. But if it does, then it begs the question, so how does this idea or strategy or person, how does that relate to the biggest possible picture in my life? How does that relate to my career, my family situation, all the other things I've got going on in Wonderful Group?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
in order to put that in, do I have to take something else out?
Yeah.
How does that fit with the ever-evolving master plan that
Yeah.
is Dan Maudhub and Wonderful Group and his whole life? So that's a really important step to bring it into that perspective in case it does or doesn't pass that step. So come back to me and then we'll deal with the next step.
Yeah, no, and I think what I love about that, Rachel, is that in that kind of layers of leadership we looked at earlier, that's actually dealing with the character as well. What are my limitations? You said earlier on, you know, it sounds like a good idea, but is it really? Can I handle it? Have I got the capacity for it, emotionally, mentally, financially, practically? There's a character thing to consider there. Have I got the skill for it? Just because I think it's a good idea, can I actually execute it? Because leadership is, and there is an element of results and performance as an outcome of leadership. So can I actually genuinely generate the outcome and results, that this idea kind of warrants, or I think it can. So no, I think that's really good. Now, Rachel, I'd love to talk with you loads more, but I've got to get on to the final point. We're running out of time, unfortunately. So
cool. Can we do our final point then?
Yep.
Let's just take it up to the top then. So, Dan, if it comes past those 3 filters,
yep,
and in your second filter, you've really spent time reflecting on it and praying about it, and you feel like you can put it into the bigger picture. If it comes past that, then with conviction and with your usual charisma, Dan, you can present the idea to the external world. And you can mean what you say. It can be a yes, or no. But you're convicted at this stage because you've actually done the proper work. You haven't said a really quick yes, and if you need to, you've said a quick no. There's no slow no's. But once we take it through the proper steps, then we can come back with all that charisma and present to the external world. But without all of those steps, our decision making is less than what it could be. So I hope that's been interesting. I've loved being on here, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And really, really appreciated that. As you're speaking, I'm processing some decisions as well that need to go back into the thinking phase and stuff like that. So hopefully everyone's got some stuff out of that, but I certainly have. So Rachel Ivers, thank you so much. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Cool. Take care.
Wasn't that great? It's great just to kind of chat with some there's some other people as well, some other leaders, because sometimes you can get caught in your own world of leadership. So I really wanted just to bring Rachel in, and thank you again, Rachel, for sharing some of those insights with us. So last section, not before we come to land, is we'll look at the area of spiritual discipline. And you kind of think, well, what's spiritual discipline got to do with leadership, and what's it got to do with everything we've been discussing? But actually, hopefully, I've already answered that question as we've gone along the last half an hour or so. We've been looking at the area of character. We've been looking at the area of conviction, the area of passion and purpose. And actually, there's a process to that as well. So hopefully one of the things you picked up as we've been going along this webinar is there's a process to a lot of these things. It's not just a one-off, or it's not just a great big idea, or some, you heard this great message, I'm just going to go and do it. There's actually a process to leadership and a lot of these areas we're discussing. So I want to very quickly look at the area of spiritual discipline. Now, you might look at this, some of you might be watching this thinking, haven't got a clue what you're on about. And so, hopefully this will be new to you. And some of you might say, well, I kind of get it. I'm in this game. Maybe I've got a faith, I've got a belief, I'm a Christian, or whatever it might be. And I kind of get what you're on about. So let's go. So let's firstly look at sort of life disciplines. And we haven't got time to unpack each of these, but if you look at your life holistically, there's all sorts of areas where we're looking at wellness, right? We're looking at development and growing. So in our financial lives, in our social lives, physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, whatever it might be. And if you wake up in the morning, you've got all these considerations in your head, your kind of mental health, your emotional health, How's the finances looking? How's my physical health looking? What relationships am I going to be developing today? What's my emotional well-being look like? And I don't know about you, but sometimes it can feel like a massive juggle. I'm trying to juggle all of those different disciplines in my life. And so, for someone that's got a faith, for someone that's anchored and rooted in the Christian faith personally, is I've turned those life disciplines um, are actually only work can only happen if I have spiritual discipline. And so spiritual discipline is the habits, practices, and experiences that are designed to develop, grow, and strengthen our spirit and soul. So basically, to build the muscles of my character and expand my inner life. So much of what goes on around us is about expanding our outer life, right? If you're in business or you're running an organization, you're always looking at growth, looking at change. If you're going to the gym, you're looking at external change. If you're developing relationships, then you're looking at, it's external. But what develops the internal? And I really believe that success in our outer life is bred out of success in our inner life. That inner character, that inner soul that's being developed is the key to success in life. And the older I get, the more I'm convicted of that. And so spiritual discipline is very much those habits and practices and experiences that we put in place to enable our spirit and soul to grow. So what could those disciplines mean? It can mean meditation. It can be prayer. It can be walks in nature. It can be reading the Bible. It can be times of fasting. It can be times of worship or singing, or it can be writing things. There's so many different areas of practice that we can put into place. Some people will practice solitude. Many people I know, which would be a direct biblical reference, would be Sabbath, will be resting for a day a week, 1 day out of 7, off social media, off off work and off the hustle, and just resting and being and recharging and letting our soul and spirit rest in God's presence if you have a faith. And so spiritual discipline is exactly that. It's the discipline, the habits and practices in our spiritual life. And so it's different to wellness because actually, from a faith perspective, spiritual discipline is about building our life around our relationship with Christ. So, and actually, it all comes down to relationships. It comes down to relationship with ourselves, our relationship with our emotions, our relationship with other people, our relationship with our body, our relationship with finances, our relationship in a wider leadership context. But from a faith perspective, it actually is built on the anchor, and that's why I used the word anchor earlier, and the cornerstone, which is Christ. And so that discipline of getting to know Christ and actually becoming more like him and getting to know his character, his nature, his values, what he stands for, what he stood for, what he came to, the change he came to make, is an incredible journey of someone growing and developing. And that's been huge for me in my leadership, because it's not only something that you kind of think about once a week if you go to church, for example, or you think about Christmas or Easter, but it's something that changes the fabric of my soul day in, day out. And, there's a scripture in the Bible for 1 Timothy in chapter 4, verse 8, which says workouts in the gymnasium are useful, definitely in my case, but a disciplined life in God is far more useful, making you fit both today and forever. And that's such a good, just a real short, sharp description of the nature and need for spiritual discipline, actually rooting and anchoring ourselves on something bigger than ourselves. So 3 benefits I wanted to just very quickly chat through around having spiritual discipline and leadership. Number 1 is when you're going through these spiritual disciplines of prayer, of reading the Bible, of solitude, of quiet, whatever it might be, you take the focus off yourself and put the focus onto a higher power. And that is so, so important, because ultimately it's very easy for our lives to get caught up in and about us. Everything becomes about us. All of our problems, all of our challenges, all of our fears, our insecurities, they just churn around on the inside, and we have no outlet. We have no way of of releasing those onto something else. And if we do, sometimes they can be unhealthy. They can be unhealthy patterns that we develop in our lives. And so actually, without spiritual discipline, it's very easy to sort of end up with unhealthy patterns. The spiritual discipline allows us to say, actually, I'm going to pray about this. I'm going to explore the Bible and see what the Bible says about this. I'm going to talk to a spiritual mentor, a spiritual director about this. I'm actually going to listen to something that talks into this scenario, and it takes the focus off you and puts it onto a higher power. That's the first benefit. Second benefit is we learn to offload and onboard the right things. So one of the scriptures in the Bible says, "You cast your cares upon Jesus." So actually you can offload in prayer, in worship, in meditation, in writing of psalms and poems. You can actually offload your problems. You can communicate your problems. You can give them over, cast your cares onto someone else, which is an incredibly comforting thing for me personally. You know, and if I look at the book of Psalms, is pretty much David offloading all the time, offloading his problems, and then he onboards God's goodness and God's grace, because he says, "But you are faithful, that you are good. And I want to take on board your goodness and your faithfulness. I want to be reminded of your goodness and faithfulness." And that just changes our character. It changes the spiritual fabric that's going on inside of us and develops that spiritual muscle that actually says, do you know what? I can see that there's a lot of uncertainty around me. And my life doesn't look rosy in every area, but I know that there is someone out there looking out for me. And I know there's a faithful God that's got my best at heart. And that's an incredibly comforting thing. And the last thing I want to look at is the area of growing our faith muscle. So the more we apply spiritual discipline, the more we trust God in prayer, the more we see God move in our own lives and in our own circumstances and in our own leadership, the more we actually develop that muscle of faith. And so we know we can go into any circumstance and have that confidence and that full assurance that I'm not gonna, it's not finished, it's not over. I'm not going to be let go of. I'm not going to fail. My life's not going to be over. That there's someone that's going to carry me through. And so they're just three very, very quick benefits around spiritual discipline. But I want to encourage you, if you don't have a faith or don't have a belief, maybe explore those spiritual disciplines and see what change it brings in your life. And and for my life, it's been a huge game changer, and something that in my leadership, I go back to the spiritual disciplines each and every day, and that's what anchors my leadership. And Rachel mentioned that earlier on as well. So hopefully that's been valuable and been insightful for some of you. We're going to come to land now. It's been 50 minutes. It's lovely 45 to 50 minutes. So yeah, if you want to connect more and to listen to other people's stories of leadership in this whole area, we have a podcast called the Wonderful Leaders Podcast, and we go behind the scenes of leaders that have got faith but are leading in different organizations, entrepreneurs, investors, business leaders, not-for-profit leaders, leaders that lead in different areas. So if you're interested in hearing different people's stories, then please check out the Wonderful Leaders Podcast on all app stores and podcast platforms. Just kind of coming to land, last slide really, is that we actually, for those of you that are listening to this thinking, it sounds great, it sounds really good, but I really could do with a full immersion into this. We're actually launching a leadership program for entrepreneurs starting in October, and we'll send you more details by email afterwards. But it's a 6-month leadership intensive, meeting online every 2 weeks. So there's 12 sessions, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff we're going to be covering off: one-to-one coaching, access to giant worldwide tools. We have your own personal leadership dashboard, and we're doing it in a real small group environment so we can really focus on you growing in your own leadership with your own personalized outcomes. So if this sounds of interest to you and you think, and you know what, I want to really deep dive into this whole topic, we'll send you the link afterwards. We'll have a discount code available for you as well. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to kind of connecting with you more. And yeah, hopefully this course will be something that'll be great for you as well. For those that aren't interested in that and you want to connect further, our email address is at the bottom, or sign up to the Wonderful Leaders newsletter, which is on the wonderfulleaders.com website. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. Thank you so much for everyone that's tuned in today. It's been great to spend time with you, and have a great rest of the afternoon. And remember, you're called to lead, you can lead, and there's people around you that can help you on that journey. So have a great afternoon. Take care.